The second meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Local Government is called to order. Will the committee assistant please call the roll?
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Chambers Armstrong. Senator Elkins.
Present.
Senator Herron. Senator Maiden.
Here.
Senator Mays Bledsoe. Here. Senator McDaniel.
Here.
Senator Mills.
Here.
Senator Rawlings.
Here.
Senator Tishner. Here. Representative Ballman. Representative Bray. Present. Representative Brown. Representative Chester Burton.
Present.
Representative Doan. Present. Representative Fleming. Representative Freeland. Representative Griffey.
Here.
Representative Hampton. Representative Hart. Representative Imes.
Present.
Representative Lewis.
Here.
Representative Maddox. Representative Meredith. Representative Neighbors.
Here.
Representative Raymer.
Here.
Representative Rorks.
Here.
Representative Stalker.
Present.
Representative Witten. Co-Chair Nemus.
Present.
Co-Chair Flannery.
Here. All right, there being a quorum, we are duly constituted to do business. Before we approve the minutes from the previous month, do any members have any introductions that they would like to make? All right, seeing none, do I have a motion and second to approve the minutes of the June 4th, 2025 meeting? Motion made by Senator Nemus. Do I have a second? Second by, I believe, Senator Mills. All those in favor of approving the minutes, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. All right, the minutes are approved. We do have a fairly lengthy agenda today, so I just ask the folks presenting to be mindful of time. First up, we have some legislative measures from the 2025 session that were maybe talked about or voted on in the House or vice versa. And being a nice guy, I'm going to let Senator Mills go first. And Representative Bray, if you want to maybe join him at the table, and you can, you all have somewhat similar issues.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to be here this morning. Robbie Mills, State Senator, 4th District.
Representative Josh Bray, State Representative, 71st District.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here today to talk about House or Senate Bill 50 from last session. Kentucky is in the midst of a housing crisis that finds us more than 210,000 housing units short statewide, and will approach almost 300,000 units short by 2029 if we do not change the current building patterns. We need to help foster change to our current housing trajectory by offering regulatory relief and financing tools to local governments across Kentucky. We're hopeful that we will have several bills come out of the Housing Task Force that is going on this interim that will do just that. One such tool that was introduced in 2025 is Senate Bill 50, as I said, related to residential infrastructure development districts, or what I call IDDs. This development tool allows local governments and property owners to initiate a petition requesting the establishment of an IDD, which must be composed of at least 5 acres, have capital costs to complete the development of at least $5 million, and when completed, at least half of the area be covered by residential housing. This petition will describe the district via a map. It will list the parcels included. It will have a development plan. It will describe the infrastructure the developer anticipates is necessary for the development and give an estimated cost for the infrastructure and most importantly, the proposed rate of the special assessment to be imposed. Once filed, the IDD will be considered by the local governing body following a public hearing of the community. The establishing ordinance will set forth a method of assessing each parcel, the manner the assessment will be paid by the property owner, and the local government's administrative fees. The IDD will immediately be dissolved once all outstanding debt obligations incurred as a result of the infrastructure costs are paid in full. This tool gives local governments the power to issue bonds, notes, and other financial obligations for the purpose of paying infrastructure costs identified in the establishing ordinance. And the term of this debt should not exceed 30 years. Now, during the session, this bill was, by some people, was called a TIF bill, but it's simply not a TIF bill. A TIF usually requires some type of investment from state or local government, or involves the future growth that the development might bring about. This tool requires no investment or budgetary expense. This simply gives local governments the ability to jumpstart the community's development and helps the developer over the biggest hurdle of development, which is the cost of infrastructure. So we've talked about Senate Bill 50, and you'll hear me. I'll refile this again. It may not have Senate Bill 50 number on it, but there are several folks in the audience that are supportive of this. Tennessee, Texas has used this substantially, and it's just a way to kickstart development in some of our communities. So appreciate y'all's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here to talk about House Bill 7, which was filed last session. It is a housing development district bill. Like Senator Mills says, we all know we have a housing shortage in Kentucky. This bill aims to allow local governments to kind of put themselves in the driver's seat. So what would happen is a local government, county, city, hopefully counties and cities working together, can identify an area suitable for development. Once they do that, a developer could come in, and the bill provides a provision that the new property taxes generated over 5 years can be rebated back through a grant program to these developers to incentivize development in places that already have the infrastructure needed and places that are already there suitable for growth, so that local governments can identify the places that growth needs to happen the most, and now we're giving them a tool to incentivize development there. In essence, that's what the bill does. We've had a lot of feedback last session, and we're taking that into consideration as the bill's rolled out for the upcoming session.
Thank you all. There's definitely been a lot of discussion on these housing measures. I know folks in my district and near my district, a lot of business leaders this seems to be one of their top issues they like to talk about. I do think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Obviously, we're on, I think, Housing Task Force 2.0, so I think we are really trying to consider options to deal with this in the best way possible. Thank you all for presenting today. Any questions from members of the committee? We have one, Senator Tishner.
Thank you, guys. This might be a question for the Housing Task Force. The number that you gave of the shortage we have across the state, what price point of homes is that? And do you know how they came to that number?
That's all across the spectrum. And so the Kentucky Housing Corporation came up with that number. It was a study done. I can't remember the consultant's name, but that's somewhere around 209,000 something. So around 210,000 that we're short right now. And the problem is that we're growing, some areas faster than others. But if we don't change the trajectory in 5 years, we're going to be 300,000 short. And the issue is that I know everybody here has had constituents come to them and talk to them about the price of their house, how much housing's going up. how much their son or daughter can't afford a new house these days. Until we get enough supply out there, prices are going to continue to skyrocket regardless of cost of inputs. So we've got to get enough housing out there. And of course, you say housing units, that's single family, that's multifamily, duplexes, apartments. So if you're in an urban area, there's a great need for workforce housing, so that you're talking more apartments than you're talking single family homes. Yep.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. All right, next up, Representative Raymer could go to the table, please. This is another issue that we discussed during the session. I believe it passed the House. I know it came out of the House Local Government Committee meeting, but an issue that I wanted to put on the agenda to kind of keep everybody updated on. If you could state your name for the record and please start your presentation.
Representative Rebecca Raymer, District 15. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yes, this is about House Bill 371, which I carried last session, and it did come through this committee and make it through the House. Didn't make it through the Senate, so I do plan on working on it next session. So just to put it in real simple terms, I'll kind of describe what's happening. So right now, if an industry operates a landfill, a residual waste landfill, for their own sole use, they are only having to go through the state. There's no local permitting process. And that statute was done like that back decades ago, just to try to make it simpler for if an industry needed that landfill for their operational use, just to kind of cut red tape. Now, I've talked to people that were around when that statute was written. What they did not foresee was that we would ever have a case where the industry was located in one county and the landfill was located in another. And that is what we've had happen. So we've had an industry that's operating in one county, the job growth, occupational tax is there, but they've opened up a landfill in another county, and the local government there has no say, there's no permitting, there's nothing. And, you know, those local governments, I mean, there's wear and tear to your roads, there's things that that county has to go through by housing that landfill. So my bill just closes that loophole and says you still can bypass local determination if your industry and landfill are located together. But if we have a case where they're located separately, then you're going to have to go through a permitting process with that local government. And that's all it does. KLC and KCO are both supportive of this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for members of the committee? Senator Elkins.
Thank you for the presentation this morning. Could you explain just a little bit what that local permitting might look like with the host county, if you would, for the landfill?
Well, you know, I think it's going to depend on that local government, but what I would foresee is it would, you know, look at the location of the landfill. You know, a lot of our local counties, our little rural counties, don't have countywide zoning. So I think that it would look at the location, the waste that they're taking, and, you know, possibly some type of hosting agreement between the local government and the industry.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so I know each county must submit a 5-year solid waste plan. Is there anything now that prevents an industry from locating a landfill if it's not included in the 5-year solid waste plan, or I'm not sure if we looked at that yet.
I don't believe so, because I think it's different because these are residual waste landfills, so it's byproducts from their manufacturing. So I think it's different than just a regular solid waste landfill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Any other members seeking to be recognized? All right, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have quite the name for this discussion here. Representative Doan. And it's probably a good thing that Representative Pollock's not on this committee. Maybe Representative Bray could concur with that after his poultry bill in the House last year. All right, if you could state your name for the record, please, and your guest, and then please proceed.
Representative Steve Doan for House District 69, and this is with me Eric Bunzow. He is a constituent of mine and a backyard chicken, I guess, producer? Expert, maybe? We'll see. So, enthusiast, certainly, and owner. So this bill came about when I was on Erlanger City Council. The first ordinance that I passed was to allow the people of Erlanger to have backyard chickens. Shortly thereafter, Eric took up the charge in Ellesmere, and they were able to pass an ordinance that also allowed for backyard chickens. Eric and I got together in the last legislative session and decided that we would put together what became House Bill 806 to allow for backyard chickens on a statewide level. The bill, it's one pager, pretty simple. It allows you to keep domesticated hens, no roosters, and the minimum number of hens that no jurisdiction could take you below would be 6. And there also allows some flexibility there for local control as well. Local municipalities or counties can set out setback restrictions, sanitation, and maintenance standards, and they can prohibit the sale of eggs commercially so that there's no issues out in the market with that. And then would also void any outright ban against backyard chickens, which is important. What we're seeing in northern Kentucky, there's actually some litigation right now regarding the ban on backyard chickens. There were some folks that had them for a number of years, and this actually they were what are they? They were service animals. They were emotional support chickens, believe it or not. I think one of the people had autism is what they had. And so the city has now taken some regulatory steps against those folks, and they filed an ADA lawsuit. So it's an important thing, I think, that we address and make sure that we've got going on. And I'll turn it over to Eric if he's got anything that he wants to add.
I mean, 3.5 years ago, I had zero
You can be
experience.
sure your microphone's on and maybe pull it up a little bit closer.
There you go. Can you hear me? Okay. 3.5 years ago, I had zero experience with chickens. I learned most of my experience on Facebook and the groups on Facebook about backyard chickens. The hardest part is keeping them from getting sick, because at that point you have to get rid of them. But I have had zero problems. I lost one because it was a rooster. I had to move him out to Burlington. So I have 5. One is an in-house chicken because she was getting attacked by the other chickens. She's being moved out within the next 2 weeks. Her eviction notice is up. I've advocated for the chickens. They're very relaxing. I like to go and grab a chicken, set it on my lap, and sit in the backyard while the other chickens run around. But this bill, we kind of constructed it like Representative Doan was saying, that it gives the cities control or the municipalities control of what they can and can't do with those chickens, other than saying you can't have them. So it's opening up for more backyard chickens than what our cities currently have in northern Kentucky and throughout the state.
All right, thank you. Did you all bring any eggs this morning?
I thought about it, but I had a flat tire this morning coming down. I got some bad juju from my boss, so I did not bring them this morning.
No eggs, okay. We have, looks like one question from Senator Rawlings.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended a city meeting, Lakeside Park, where they voted down, and the critics were almost universally talking about how chickens spread disease. And so as I sat there, I thought, people have had chickens from time immemorial. And I had read articles about what a great fertilizer that chicken waste is. So how would you respond to that criticism?
If you don't have them, you wouldn't know. And I think that's welcoming them into my life was a little different. When I moved here almost 12 years ago, I had a dog that has been relocated to my mom's because of the type of work I was doing at the time. So having chickens allows me to be a little more flexible with my schedule. But as far as what they bring are nice eggs. You know what's going in, and you also know what's coming out.
Very good, thanks.
I believe Senator Tishner had a question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you speak to how this would affect HOA's authority to put in regulations in their own communities?
HOAs would still be allowed to ban backyard chickens. This would have no impact on those.
Anyone else seeking to be recognized from the committee? All right, thank you all. This is very popular with people. I know a few years ago, I saw this on Facebook or YouTube or something, and actually talked my father into doing this. And I know my daughters, they love they're pets in some ways. You know, they're very smart animals, but the eggs are a plus. So it is very popular with people now. Glad that you're bringing this bill, and hopefully we can keep this discussion going. Thank you all. All right. Next up is item number 4 on the agenda, discussion of housing and land use. There's 2 folks. I believe one may be online. If Charles Gardner and Nolan Gray could come to the table. Which one is online? No, they're separate. Yeah. Okay, which one is that?
Can you hear me okay?
Okay. All right. So we have one person presenting remotely, one person present. If the gentleman sitting at the table, if you could state your name for the record, please, and then have the other person do the same that's online.
Good morning, Chair Flannery, members of
you could pull your microphone up a little closer.
Sure.
To you.
Members of the committee, Charlie Gardner. I'm a research fellow with the Mercatus Center at George Mason University.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good morning. I'm Nolan Gray. I'm a Senior Director of Legislation at California YIMBY and a scholar with the Bluegrass Institute.
All right. All right. Mr. Gardner, I'm going to let you present first, and then Mr. Gray will follow.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's interesting to hear about chickens. I'm from the Northeast, actually, but our neighbor keeps chickens, I should mention, and they supply family with free eggs all the time. So it's actually, from my perspective, a nice perk. Just wanted to contribute that anecdote. I'm not here to talk about chickens, but I am here to talk about something somewhat similar, which is state-level reforms, potential state-level reforms to local land use. I'm with the Mercatus Center. I'm a research fellow there. As part of what we do market-based research into economic policy. Most of what I do focuses on zoning and land use. I'm also glad to be presenting with Nolan Gray, a Kentucky native son who's done a lot of terrific work in this area. I think you'll hear from him in just a minute. He gives a great presentation, so I'll just say thank you for not having me follow him. That would be a lot of pressure. I much prefer going first. So, oops. So I'm going to give a slightly different presentation than I did yesterday, just giving some other details as to a little bit of background. So land use laws generally consist of those laws and regulations, right, that govern the use of private land and the form of structures, and also establish procedures. And most of these laws are enacted at the state and local levels with relatively limited involvement by the federal government. I've divided them here, cut off a little bit, but into 3 basic categories. Technical regulations, which are building codes, fire codes. If you were here yesterday, one of those would be, for example, single stair regulations. Secondly, are planning and zoning regulations, how land can be used or the size of structures. That's traditionally what we understand as zoning and land use. And then finally, procedural regulations, those rules which establish how applications to use land or build structures are approved. That's your typical land use process from start to finish, an application to the approval. A very brief history of how this has happened over time. Way back in the 1920s, it's almost, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the decision, actually. Local zoning was upheld in Euclid versus Ambler. Since then, some states in the Northeast have passed builders' remedy laws, but really it's only been in the last 5 years, and especially really in the last 3 years, that states have gotten involved in local regulating land use at a local level, and actually, in some cases, preempting local regulations. So why state intervention? I think Senator Mills mentioned it before. There's an awareness of the effects of exclusionary zoning and a housing shortage that's been building in some states over many, many years with backlogs of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of units in some states. It's become a nationwide phenomenon. And there's been a perception that I think after years and years and years of waiting for localities to take the lead on this, that they have not, they've not done so, and that states need to get into the act. So common examples of reform. Legalization of ADUs is something that's been proposed in Kentucky. Minimum lot size reform. 2 states this year, Texas and Maine, both in their 2025 sessions, had starter home minimum lot size reform bills that were passed. I have a memo which I'm happy to circulate, which gives some links to those bills if you're curious to see the language that those states used in those bills. Legalization of small multifamily. A reduction of parking minimums, which are a particular issue in historic areas of cities where there isn't a lot of existing parking, and it can make opening new businesses or reusing buildings impossible. Streamlining the permitting process, shot clock bills. We have a full set of recommendations that's coming out from Mercatus next month that will have 18 different recommendations. And if anybody would be interested in that, I'd be happy to provide that. Just reach out to me. It includes these ideas and many more. 2023 was when a lot of this got started. This again just shows you some of the states that passed bills during that year. In 2024, we saw even more bills, and I think in 2025, something like 650 bills across more than 24 states addressing housing policy. So it's building, but this gives you a sense of, I think, the scope of the reforms across different states. California, I'll just pass over that. They've been particularly active. I think not quite as relevant to Kentucky, but they've probably been at this the longest and have the most examples if you're looking for potential other model language. Again, this map has expanded further since this time, but this shows you what states have been active as of 2023. To this we can add Iowa, Arkansas, Tennessee, Virginia, Alabama, Utah, and a few others. So the movement really has been spreading. States with some notable successes. Montana's package of housing bills was very successive, sometimes referred to as the Montana Miracle from a couple of years ago, but we've seen many other states get into the act recently as well. There's Rhode Island, Washington, and Vermont. New York and Colorado were unsuccessful with the reforms a couple of years ago. Some people said that was due to putting too much into one bill. We had an omnibus bill in Connecticut this past session, which did pass and was vetoed by the governor, even though it was his own majority leader's bill. But there was some thought that was because there was so much in the same bill that it put a lot of potential targets for opposition. This is something I mentioned briefly yesterday, but single-stair apartment buildings is something that is really more of a regulatory reform to building codes that allows lower-cost, smaller apartment buildings. And also, this is another thing I could mention, something that North Carolina did, I believe, a couple of years ago. allowing multifamily buildings to be subject to the residential building code rather than the commercial building code, which is the case in most states. Just a few additional ideas. So looking forward, the housing crisis is continuing. There's a backlog of houses that need to be built in almost every state. Looking at Kentucky's situation, the market is able, this is the question that people often raise, the market is capable of producing starter homes that are affordable to the median Kentucky household. You can see this on the market. It simply requires a regulatory environment that's conducive to producing those homes. And that requires clearing red tape out of the way so that builders can meet that demand. That typically requires smaller lots. That's going to require homes with less frontage so that each home doesn't require as much costly infrastructure. That's come up again and again. I've heard here is this, the cost of infrastructure is a burden for developers building because they have to put that all in ahead of time. If you require smaller frontages, essentially that's less infrastructure per house and brings down the cost of land. That's a major factor in housing costs. And also, I would say there were several laws passed in this last session, but the example of California and now some other states that have come back to this again and again, like Montana and New Hampshire, shows that there's been a tendency of these reforms to multiply over time and to build on each other if legislatures maintain their attention on this. As unfortunately, this issue is not going away. With the backlog that Senator Mills mentioned, it's not a problem that's going to be solved overnight in 1 year or 2 years. It's something that's really going to take a long-term approach, as this shortage didn't build up overnight either. So we're expecting in the 2026 session, reforms to land use law will continue to be an important part of many states' legislative agendas. We'll see if it tops 600 bills again, but we had something like 122 bills passed. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
I believe Senator Adams has a question or comment. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we talk a lot about trying to get rid of red tape. And a lot of times that red tape is there to protect some of the surrounding neighborhoods or to protect a watershed, for instance, or is there appropriate infrastructure that's able to handle that? Give me an example of how eliminating red tape has kind of worked in some of these other municipalities or states that are something a little bit different than kind of what I described.
Sure. An example that might be called third-party inspections, where you allow a credentialed professional, although not necessarily employed by the local government, to perform inspections on a faster time basis than the local government might be able to do. So instead of waiting perhaps 6 months or 4 months or 2 months, they could get the inspections done in 2 weeks, but to the same standards. A fully certified professional has all the same expertise and can provide the same service in a shorter amount of time, potentially even for less cost. So that would be an example. It's anything that really, I would say, decreases the time, decreases the cost, or decreases uncertainty without compromising, basic health and safety considerations.
Can I have one more follow-up, Mr. Chairman? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so in these other states, did they pass a state law that required the local government to make these adjustments, or was this a local government kind of just reacting? I don't know, because we have some communities that have planning and zoning, and we have some communities that don't have planning and zoning, and so it kind of makes it tricky when you pass kind of a state law that requires somebody to do something that they may not have the expertise to do.
Yeah, there's definitely concern about imposing added mandates or unfunded mandates on local communities. And I think most of these laws don't really do that. They're deregulatory in terms of sometimes superseding or clarifying local zoning requirements. Okay. And often I've seen if a reform is a little bit more complex or is going to require a bit more work. I've seen as much as 18 months of lead time until localities are required to implement them. So they have enough time to study the issue, update the regulations, consider the effect on the community. It's very seldom that you'll have a major zoning reform that'll take place upon passage of the act. So that's one way I've seen if there's a question or a concern about that. In other cases, certain communities, smaller communities, have been exempted, like Texas's starter homes bill applies only to some of the larger communities and counties in the state.
Okay.
Which is something else we've seen, which is just sort of focusing the effect of the bill on where it's likely to have the most good, the most impact.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Senator McDaniel's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So help me with a philosophical struggle I'm having. As somebody who got his professional start pouring residential bi-level foundations, I look at a lot of what the inspections are and frankly what different municipalities require, and I think to myself, if they want to make life hard and they want to drive their housing costs up, why should we intervene to save them from themselves when their surrounding communities may very well be far more in favor of a more free market approach and should be allowed to succeed based off of that approach rather than us intervening to save certain governments from themselves?
That is, I appreciate that question, and I think that gets to the core of the justification for statewide intervention rather than letting this housing laboratory play itself out on a local level, which is sort of happening by default. Growth goes to those municipalities which are open to it. I think the problem from a statewide level is that housing is, even though it may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, it is of statewide concern. Having a housing shortage in one city affects the housing situation in the state as a whole, and we can't expect those handful of cities that are permitting a lot of housing to bear the burden for the entire state. There's a need from top to bottom, all income levels in most areas of the state, and that's something that has to be, in my opinion, adopted comprehensively. I think another issue is that localities, we've seen this in other states, often have an incentive to each one to exclude growth and send it over to the next municipality. And if all the municipalities, all the counties in a state do that, you end up with none of them encouraging growth because nobody wants to be the first one to move. A state has a role, I think, in just for promoting the overall welfare of its citizens, the overall health of the state economy, of breaking through that impasse and freeing up not only housing production, but the economic engine of the state. I guess one other comment in the case of the Commonwealth here, those towns or cities which are not in favor of housing may at the same time be good locations for economic development. So the state also, I think, has an important role to play in making sure that housing is available near where economic opportunities are also available. So it's in my opinion that really it's only the state that has the right perspective and vantage point to be able to address these issues comprehensively and on the behalf of all citizens who I think are entitled to have a reasonable opportunity to attain home ownership, a reasonable opportunity to move if they need to different employment opportunities, and that can only be provided through an abundant housing supply.
Anyone else seeking to be recognized? See none. Sir, you can maybe remain seated there. There may be a follow-up. I'm going to let Mr. Gray present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll share my screen here. And can you all see these slides okay?
We can. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and honorable members of the committee. Sorry for my lack of coat and tie. I'm actually halfway through my honeymoon, but this is just too important of an issue, so I wanted to be able to join. Thanks for the privilege to be able to speak today. Out of respect for your packed schedule and my wife's patience, I'll move quickly. So greetings from the future. As Charlie mentioned previously, I'm the legislative director for a housing advocacy group in California. In California, the median home price is 8 times the median household income. The typical family has absolutely no path to homeownership whatsoever. Half of all renters spend a third of their income on rent, and a third or so of renters spend half of their income on rent. So half of their paycheck going right down the drain on the first of every month. And then, of course, somewhat infamously, California has over 200,000 people sleeping in cars and tents and shelters every single night. This crisis that California faces in its most extreme form is not inevitable. On the contrary, it was the result of a half century of policy designed to make it hard to build housing. We have local zoning regulations that make it hard to build the range of housing typologies that the state needed. We had infamously slow permitting. It could take months, if not years, sometimes to get a permit. And we have a host of unfunded mandates that increases the cost of housing. So we're now to a point where a mere 10 years ago, the state projected continued population growth. We're now to a point where we'll be doing good to hold our population, and the destruction of communities is hard to overstate. But so why am I speaking to you today? Well, I was very lucky to have grown in a very different state. I'm an 8th generation Kentuckian. This is a photo of my dad and I in front of my parents' first home in Lexington, purchased in the early 90s. They purchased this home for $68,000. My dad had just gotten a job for one of the Toyota suppliers in Georgetown. At the time, the median home in Lexington was 2.5 times the median household income. Even adjusting for inflation today, the home they bought would have been $151,000. We'd be incredibly lucky to have more homes like this. As I'll mention, today the median home is over 5 times that amount. The median home is twice what my parents paid for this humble starter home at around $324,000, even adjusting for inflation. Unfortunately, this Kentucky that I grew up in and many of the folks here had the privilege to grow up in is rapidly disappearing, and it's looking more and more like California. This is a home price index of homes in California. This gray bar here toward the right end of the chart was supposed to be a historic run-up in home prices that changed everything. And now I regret to say we're at the far end of this chart. We've seen an incredible run-up in housing prices. Best way to solve a crisis is an early diagnosis. And I think we have the flexibility here to make that. In rapidly growing cities like Lexington and Bowling Green, the median home price is now over 5 times the median household income. Louisville had the 5th highest rent increases in the country last year, and rent burdens across the state continue to rise. And then homelessness continues to rise year over year coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the homelessness is actually increasing most rapidly in rural areas, which is a relatively new phenomenon. What's driving this crisis? We know it's underbuilding, and here's a profile of permitting Kentucky relative to its peers: North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Indiana. Anytime a statistic would come out, my mom, who's from Martin County, right across the border from West Virginia, would always say, "Thank God for West Virginia," because they'd always do a little bit worse than us. And consistent with that, West Virginia is underbuilding, but they're not having nearly the economic revitalization that Kentucky's having. Relative to some of our peers like Tennessee and North Carolina, Kentucky is building significantly less housing. We know that those cities and metro areas that have been building housing over the last few years have seen rents fall or even stabilize, home prices fall or stabilize, and they're remaining affordable. Unfortunately, many of Lexington's metro areas are not among the list of places that are seeing prices stabilize or fall. On the contrary, these crises are going to kick into overdrive as jobs continue to come to the state. We've already got a crisis that's affecting folks who already live here. And if we continue to attract employers, which is a very good problem to have, that crisis is going to get even worse if we don't build enough housing. The good news is we know the cure, and a lot of the cure is entirely free. So we have to reform the California-style zoning regulations that make it impossible to build housing in California or in Kentucky. We have to deal with these ad hoc discretionary review processes that add delays and unpredictability to the process. And we have to address the unnecessary cost drivers that are untethered from health and safety considerations that nonetheless increase the cost of housing. It's the NIMBY phenomenon that has so destroyed so many other states and made it affordable. So I'm going to reinforce a lot of what my colleague Charlie mentioned, that it's important for the state to take the lead on this. This is a statewide crisis requiring statewide solutions. In many cases, the zoning and permitting powers that are being abused and misused by local governments, cities, or counties were delegated by the states. And it's important for state legislators to place guardrails on commonly abused regulatory powers and to scale up best practices. Other peer states, as I'll highlight, are leading, and I'd like to see Kentucky lead on this as well. Just emphasizing the sweep of the reforms that are happening at the state level. After about 100 years of this being an exclusively local power, we've gotten ourselves into a situation where there's a nationwide housing crisis. More and more states, including Kentucky, start to look like California when it comes to housing affordability. But we're also seeing more and more state governments step up and scale up strong reforms. The beautiful thing about this reform space, I think, is that it's not especially partisan. It's not especially ideological. Mayor of New York City, Fiorello LaGuardia, once said, there's no Republican or Democratic way to pick up trash. You've got a housing shortage. There's not really any alternative solution to building a lot more housing. We're seeing solutions in red states and blue states alike. The way they talk about the issue might be different, but the solutions are broadly the same. So I'll talk about a few outstanding examples from states that I think are good peers for Kentucky and ready out-of-the-box solutions that could be carried over to the Commonwealth. So the first is it's going to be really, really key to allow for single-family starter homes, and those are going to be homes on smaller lots. I'll talk about this a little more in a coming slide. Texas SB 15 is a great comp for that. Removing prohibitions on housing in commercial areas and allowing for mixed-use communities or allowing for a variety of communities or underutilized land to be used. Allowing for missing middle housing typologies, as Montana did with SB 323, and then empowering homeowners to build accessory dwelling units. Minimum lot sizes are key. One of the main drivers of the cost of a home is the land. And I often hear local elected officials say, well, we can't build any more housing because we've run out of land. At a certain point, you can reduce this cost by allowing developers to use land more efficiently. Many homeowners might say, or prospective homeowners might say, well, I'd be happy with a smaller home on a smaller lot if it's near a job center or a school or a park or other amenity. In Texas, this has been deployed for decades, allowing for smaller homes that fit the budget of families today. We say starter homes, and I think a lot of folks imagine a single family home on a 7,500 square foot lot. A starter home in 2025 might be a townhouse, might be a unit in a duplex, it might be a home on a 2,500 square foot lot. The Florida example is interesting because Florida, like so many other states, was dealing with a common problem of strip malls that were sitting empty in an age of e-commerce, and then office parks that were sitting half occupied in an age of higher rates of remote work. And what they said, well, we can kill two birds with one stone. We've also got a workforce housing shortage. The Live Local Act provided some minimal property tax abatement in exchange for workforce housing, and then set a reasonable statewide framework that allowed for multifamily housing that's inherently much more affordable at a market rate without any necessary subsidy to be built on some of these lots. And if it's done right, I think it actually enriches the community, enriches the quality of life for the folks who already live there. You take what might be a dead or dying corridor and turn it into a new town center. Many states have legalized what's called missing middle housing. And to the committee members' previous question, building new housing in existing communities can be tricky. Folks get used to the way things are around them, and that's totally reasonable. The problem is that if we never build any new housing, if we don't build any new buildings, then the character of the community will change in a meaningful sense. Folks will get priced out. Only wealthier and wealthier folks will be able to live there. Young families won't be able to live in our communities, even if all the buildings around them change. But you still have to be sensitive to folks' expectations. And one of the nice things about missing middle housing or low-rise housing ranging from duplexes up to live-work units is that they respect the low-slung character of our existing communities, bringing back online inherently affordable typologies like a cottage court or townhouses that are going to be key for ending the Kentucky housing crisis. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about housing affordability in California, but one of the exceptional things that we have done in recent years has been legalizing accessory dwelling units, otherwise called granny flats or mother-in-law units. And these empowered homeowners to add an additional new unit to their unused garage, basement, attic. Nobody had to do it. It was purely voluntary. But what we've seen since approximately 2017 has been over 100,000 ADUs built. That's pretty remarkable. That's 100,000 new homes, providing homeowners with an additional source of revenue, potentially providing a space for a young adult child or an aging parent to stay close, or even just a new unit to rent out and have an additional source of revenue, all while providing new and additional housing for renters as well. It's all well and good if the zoning allows for the housing, but if it takes months or even years of unpredictable permitting to get a permit, it might as well not be legal. Making sure that your permitting is fast and predictable is one of the easiest things that the state of Kentucky could do, and setting a clear statewide standard here would be really valuable. As Charlie mentioned, allowing for third-party professionals to conduct permit reviews and inspections has spread across states like Tennessee, Florida, and Texas. We're working on a bill on this in California. It's tougher going, but we're going to get it over the finish line. Prohibiting vague standards. You often read a lot of these zoning codes, and you would think, well, okay, I'll open up the rule book, see what the rules are, and if I follow the rules, I'll get my permit. The trouble is the standards are often quite vague, so tightening up some of those standards. Finally, prohibiting downsonings or prohibiting cities from arbitrarily changing the rules in the middle of the game, taking away property owners' property rights or their ability to build on their land. One of the big things that we've seen over the past 10 or so years has been the dramatic increase in how long it takes to build housing. And some of that's due to supply constraints or building material constraints with the disruptions around the pandemic. Some of that's due to labor market disruptions. But a lot of that's due to local governments just moving slower and not issuing permits or not doing so in a more predictable way. You would think this is crazy. Whenever I describe this policy area to folks, I think they're often surprised. In many cases, the actual rules that are regulating new housing development are never really written down. And they're up to a committee, or they're up to a bureaucrat, or they're up to somebody who might not even be appointed or elected. Passing laws that require the rules to be clearly stated up front, I think, is essential. Then the last is costs. Again, it's all well and good if the zoning allows the housing. It's all well and good if you can get a permit promptly, but if it doesn't pencil, it's not going to get built. There are a lot of aspects of this issue that you all don't control. You don't control interest rates. You might not control tariffs on construction materials or construction labor supply, but there are a lot of things that the state government and by proxy local governments do control. Costly building material mandates that force housing to use more expensive materials, even when a cheaper material that's fully safe might have done the job. Arkansas's SB 170 preempted those rules and allowed for flexibility in building materials. Allowing for HUD code manufactured housing in any context where housing exists. Manufactured housing has a bad stigma. A lot of folks in my family live in manufactured housing. Modern manufactured housing is nothing like, I think, when the stigmas were developed. It's safe, it's energy efficient, and yet local governments often discriminate against manufactured housing. Many states have adopted laws preempting that and providing an even playing field. Amending the state building code to allow to reduce costs associated with high building code mandates. North Carolina and Tennessee have done a lot of work on this, and I'm happy to talk more about that. And then preempting local mandates that don't serve any health or safety basis, but serve to limit the supply of housing, such as parking mandates. Does this look like a terrible home? Does this look like a home that should be illegal? Well, in many jurisdictions across the country, prohibition on vinyl siding or various forms of siding, or a mandate that the home be surrounded by masonry would practically make this home illegal, or require that it use a form of siding that would increase the cost by $10,000, $15,000. Should this home be illegal? It looks quite nice to me. I think it's precisely this form of starter home that a lot of folks would love to have. This is mostly manufactured housing. It's mostly built in a factory and it's put down on the site. You wouldn't know the difference, maybe unless you'd been told. And yet again, this is a form of housing that local rules often arbitrarily discriminate against. Giving consumers flexibility is key. Many jurisdictions impose rules that have nothing to do with health or safety, such as high parking mandates. Now, of course, many households might want to pay more to make sure that they have a parking space guaranteed, even in an urban context, but you might have folks who want to live in an existing job center or along a bus route that takes them to work, or it might be a senior or someone with a disability who, for whatever reason, can't own a car. And yet, in many cases, local zoning codes mandate the provision of loads of off-street parking. If you have one parking space per bedroom required or two parking spaces per unit, as the chart on the right shows, you might be forcing that family to consume as much space in parking as they do in living space. Again, most families are going to want to pay more for parking, but to my mind, the most important thing we could be doing in a housing crisis is to give families the power to make that choice about trade-offs. I would flag too, these rules often make it illegal to adaptively reuse historic properties. If you were to take one of these and turn it into ground floor retail with apartments on top, with conventional parking rules, you might have to demolish the adjacent structure. I'd like to see more Kentucky downtowns revitalized, and these rules often stand in the way. In addition to the fantastic work that Charlie's doing with the Mercatus Center and Bluegrass Institute's doing a lot of great work on this, we put together model legislation that distills some of the best ideas at a group that I'm working with, the Metropolitan Abundance Project. So I'm happy to talk about that. And just to sum up, I'd like to see Kentucky jump to first in line on this issue. I'm personally invested in the state getting its housing crisis under control. I've been living in California 5 years, and I've seen what happens when this is allowed to fester, and I desperately don't want this for my home state. There are a lot of best practices that have already been proven in other peer states. The state's going to have to play an important role in encouraging local governments through a mixture of carrots and sticks to plan for growth, rather than not just constantly come up with a reason to say no to everything. And I would encourage members of this committee to think big. Zoning's been around for about 100 years. It's not achieved the results that we would like on many margins, and I would encourage folks to think big about what we want land use regulations to do and how we get them better in line with our state's challenges. So again, thank you for the privilege to be able to speak, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. I believe we have one question or comment from Senator McDaniel. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, I'd like you to opine on something. You talk about supply here and things that we can do to increase supply, which is obviously critically important. But we also have to talk about things that have reduced supply. In particular, we have a lot of municipalities that allow for short-term rentals. 2 companies alone have pulled about 17,700 units out of the housing stock in the last decade or so. Would you support us implementing legislation that would ban short-term rentals or any approval of short-term rentals at the municipal level as a way of increasing stock?
I'm happy to address that. I'm sorry, Charlie, if you were about to say something. I think there are lots of reasons why the state or local governments might want to regulate short-term rentals, but I've seen no evidence that banning or tightening the regulations around short-term rentals improves housing affordability. We now have quite a few examples of city and states regulating this. In California, they're very strictly regulated. I've just seen no evidence that it improves housing affordability.
I'm not talking about regulating, I'm talking about banning. Like, just get rid of short-term rentals. I mean, that's over 17,000 units that could be brought back online if they weren't being used for that.
Yeah, I've not seen any evidence that cities or states banning short-term rentals improves housing affordability in any meaningful way.
Senator Nemes, you're recognized.
Do y'all address the situation of low-income starter homes and differentiate between low-income housing? And what I have found is builders don't want to build those because they make more money on apartments in high-cost houses.
I can jump in and Nolan take that one. And Nolan, feel free to add anything if you'd like. I think the market generally, contrary to what the perception is happy to provide low-cost, single-family detached housing, whether that's in the form of very small lot homes or in the form of manufactured housing. The issue, I believe, is not the market forces at play. The issue is, I think, regulation that strongly disfavors very small, very modest single-family homes. There was a question asked yesterday as to, if any other jurisdictions had, that I was asked, any other jurisdictions had banned single-family homes. And I said, well, no, there's no jurisdiction that prohibits the construction of a single-family home, but I thought a little more about that. And there actually is a type of single-family home that most jurisdictions highly disfavor, if not almost ban completely. And that's what Nolan was talking about, the very small lot single-family home, which enables the creation of homes which are cheap because they tend to be on the smaller side, maybe as small as 700, 800, 900 square feet. And even with current construction costs, it's possible to build one of these homes new for as little as $160,000 or $170,000. Similar to the situation that Nolan mentioned in Lexington back in the 1990s. It can be done, and there's a huge market for it. We know there's a huge market for it because that's what's affordable to the median Kentucky household. And being the median, there's a lot of people out there who would like to have that opportunity, whether because they don't have the income or they're at a different stage of life, they don't need as much space. That's a huge untapped market. And I believe it's more of an issue of regulatory failure. And then when we look at zoning regulations town by town, you often see a multifamily zone, and then there is a very restrictive single-family zone. But we will not see a very permissive single-family zone that allows starter homes. So I would submit that, particularly if we look at the examples of some other cities and states that do allow these homes, once you allow them, they are built in great quantity. Houston, which Nolan mentioned, is an example of that. There's some other examples as well. But I think were it allowed, you would see quite a lot of them built, maybe more than we might think.
All right, I believe I'm going to allow one more question or comment from Senator Mills. We still have another item on the agenda, so this will be the last on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment on just the question Senator Nemus asked, and I'm sure everybody else on this panel has experienced this. Those small starter homes, small lots are great ideas, but when somebody moves into a starter house, they don't all of a sudden just have one car. And it seems like that in our area where we've tried to do these starter homes, you end up with streets packed with cars, people parking in yards. Just how have you seen that creatively? I know in Nashville, my son lived in a townhome, and they had 6 parking places that were like first come, first serve community parking, and you end up with all this competition of moving cars, keeping cars. How does somebody overcome that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, sir. So most of the new starter homes that are coming online will have some off-street parking. I've very rarely seen them that they don't have any, but to your point, yeah, there are going to be more cars. I think it's a mixture of code enforcement and on-street parking management. So if someone's parking on the front lawn, there's really no way to deal with that except to send out the code enforcer. But for the on-street parking, I think this is where there's value in having parking residential permit passes and saying, look, you have a pass to park 1 or 2 parking spaces as the case may be, given the frontage of your lot on the street, and no more. This is where you have to do a little bit of local government, good government to manage the on-street parking.
And just to add to that briefly, even relative to homes, most cars don't take up an enormous amount of space. There are ways to accommodate parking on small lots. It's actually quite efficient. They can accommodate 2 or 3 cars. If you're a bit creative with the design, using parking pads, accommodating garages. So there are design ways to address that concern. Some people complain about the aesthetics of that sometimes, but there are creative ways architecturally to accommodate them.
All right, gentlemen, I appreciate your all's presentation today. Very interesting topic, a lot of complexities to this issue. I appreciate your all's perspective. Thanks for joining us. And Mr. Gray, you're free to get back to your honeymoon.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Last on the agenda is number 5, discussion of short-term rental policies. If you all could state your name for the record, please, and please proceed.
Yes, sir. I'm Katie Ashley with Airbnb.
Jason Underwood, contract lobbyist for Airbnb.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Like I said, my name is Katie, and I'm a policy manager with Airbnb, and I have the privilege of working in the Commonwealth of Kentucky as part of my region. I live in Tennessee, in Franklin, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. So I enjoy being able to travel to Kentucky as part of my work. So again, thanks so much for allowing me to be here today. When Chairman Flannery offered the opportunity to speak as part of today's committee agenda, I thought it would be a good chance to talk about a few things in particular. Importance not only for Airbnb, but for the residents of Kentucky who choose to open their homes to guests, and for those guests who choose to visit and explore the Commonwealth of Kentucky. In 2024, Airbnb hosts in Kentucky welcomed over 1 million guests and continue to help bring the benefits of travel and tourism spending to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Specifically, Airbnb helped contribute $660 million impact on the tourism industry here in Kentucky, Part of these benefits include supporting small businesses and the local economy, especially during major events like the Kentucky Derby, where hosted cities help Louisville accommodate an influx of visitors. I was actually lucky enough to be one of those visitors this year and be able to attend the Derby. And it turns out that buying my ticket was actually the least difficult part of my logistics for being able to attend. Who knew that lodging prices could be so high? I guess y'all do because you live here and you experience that, but for someone who's never gotten the opportunity to attend that before, it was very shocking. So luckily, I was able to pull together resources with some friends of mine, and we found this great little home on Airbnb. It was perfect for what we needed. We were able to attend, and again, buying my ticket, the least difficult thing I did. Once we got the home, we got there, went to the grocery store. So we got groceries and whatnot, and then we figured out, okay, well, now we've got a transportation issue, because how do you get there and back? Parking is not an option, as you all know. Ride shares and any type of private transportation is just so expensive. And so our host actually connected us with his next door neighbor. And his next door neighbor, Jeremy, had nothing going on that weekend. He works weekdays, had the weekend off. And so he was happy to help my friends and I get back and forth to the track and back to the home, and to earn some extra money along the way. So this is just a really great opportunity of how Airbnb not only allows for the lodging of guests, it also affords guests the opportunity to help fuel the local economy. And because hosts keep approximately 90 cents on the dollar of every booking at their home, my friends and I were able to secure lodging for an awesome event, aid our host in earning some supplemental income, and then afforded our new friend Jeremy the opportunity to make some extra money. So when guests arrived at their listing, they often receive recommendations from their host. Where do I want to go get groceries? Where's a good donut shop down the road? Where's a good restaurant that you can go to? And so this type of hosted travel helps guests to live like the locals and has a significant positive economic impact on guests as they spend time and money in these local communities. Citizen-led tourism, that's really what it's all about. More than 60% of census tracts in Kentucky are home to Airbnb listings, but no hotels. So as short-term rentals help to mine that accommodation gap in the more rural areas of the state, it benefits not only the guests, but also those local communities. For example, the Bourbon Trail. From Bardstown to Claremont and beyond, the Bourbon Trail, as you all know, offers a really unique bluegrass experience. The history, the scenic small towns, the world-renowned distilleries, many of which are located in areas with few or no hotels. And so that really makes short-term rentals viable, and the vital part to supporting local tourism and driving that economic vitality for rural communities. And so I don't know about y'all, but when I look for an area to visit and to travel to, convenience and accommodation are two the most important things to me and my family. And I don't think that we're alone in that. So if you all as policymakers hope to continue to feed this tourism engine in the Commonwealth, as it's been so proven valuable here, we hope that you'll see the importance of short-term rentals as part of that success. Now I want to pivot to the importance of short-term rentals for Kentuckians who choose to open their homes to those guests. Airbnb helps Kentucky families turn what's typically one of the greatest expenses, which we just heard an entire presentation about that, their home, into a source of supplemental income to help with the rising cost of living. The typical host in Kentucky last year in 2024 earned approximately $14,000 in supplemental income. And 80% of our hosts report that hosting on Airbnb is just that. It's supplemental income. It's not their primary source of income. It's just a way for them to be able to have extra funds to live their life and to keep up with, cost as things continue to increase. And as we just heard in the previous testimony, the ability to stay in and to afford homes is becoming more difficult. So if this is another option to allow people the opportunity to do that, we feel it's very important. That's why our hosts report to us that being able to, exercise their private property rights and short-term rent their home allows them to more easily afford their home. For example, most of our hosts in Kentucky actually only rent their home out for 57 days or less a year. So we're not talking about people who have an entire home that's taken offline for 365 days. We're talking about someone who lives in their home and for majority of the year and for whatever reason chooses to exercise that right and to short-term rent their home to make some extra money. So not only do short-term rentals help provide that economic opportunity for citizens, they're fundamental to Kentucky residents' property rights, which, as you all know, is one of the bedrocks of the foundation of our great country. And it's one of the reasons that Airbnb supports legislation to create a statewide framework to ensure that Kentucky homeowners across the Commonwealth have the right to benefit from home sharing, while supporting cities and counties in enforcing those short-term rental regulations that help them address the issues in their community. One of the reasons I'm here today is actually due to some of the actions taken by two of your largest cities, Louisville and Lexington, regarding the use of short-term rentals. As you may or may not know, the Metro Councils have severely limited the property rights of homeowners by requiring, among other things, conditional use permits, which I didn't know anything about until I actually asked Jason here. I'm like, so what's the process for going through and applying and being granted a conditional use permit? And turns out you've got to hire an attorney to do that. You've got to go present in front of like a planning and zoning commission. And so for someone who isn't familiar with that type of world of that work, I mean, that is just an immediate barrier to a majority of people who wouldn't even go through the process of applying for one of those. Also, they've got density barriers. So if your neighbor got to City Hall and applied for their permit before you did, you were just out of luck. So now we're picking winners and losers. Your border states like Tennessee and Indiana have laws in the books to provide a statewide regulatory framework for short-term rentals, and they have for years. And what we've experienced in Tennessee is localities actually appreciate having that uniform framework by which they can regulate, allowing for the adoption of those local ordinances to provide regulations around things that are paramount to the communities, like health and public safety, while also not infringing on the private property rights of their citizens. So we've got the enforcement mechanisms like parking, the number of guests, restriction on large gatherings, trash and solid waste management, other things. They're just really important to local governments, and we support those. We just don't support a ban on short-term rentals. At the end of this past session, Speaker Osborne sponsored an amendment to Senate Bill 110, which would strike that balance between affording local governments the ability to regulate short-term rentals and at the same time protecting private property rights by establishing that statewide framework for regulation. And we look forward to continuing that discussion going into this next legislative session with you as policymakers and with stakeholders. So, thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
I believe Representative Stalker has a question or comment. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. You had made a comment about, I think you'd said that there was investment or homes that people were renting out only 56, 57 days of the year, correct? Can you give this committee a breakdown of how many of these properties that are with Airbnb are not their primary residential?
I would have to get that exact number to you, and I'm happy to provide that to the chair and to members of this committee. I can tell you that almost 80% of the hosts in the state of Kentucky only have one short-term rental permit. And so I'm not sure if that stat helps to kind of get where you're going with it, but I'll get the exact number and get it back to you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Senator Tishner, you're recognized. You're unrecognized. Senator Maiden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to know, do you all pay occupancy tax to local government and tourism?
We do, yes, sir, and we have. Unfortunately, there is a pending lawsuit, and so I'm not able to expand on a lot of details regarding a tax situation, but I can tell you that, yes, sir, we have collected and remitted state and local occupancy taxes for years, and I'm happy to get you that exact number.
Do you do it with all counties? I'm under the impression that you don't do it with every county.
We do have voluntary collection agreements with several jurisdictions that we had entered into back years ago. And like I said, I'm happy to provide you whatever information I can offline about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Senator, just to add to that, the voluntary agreements are with the largest population centers, Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, many others. But we were trying to do a fix legislatively to that issue because, as the chairman who just left is aware, and Chairman Peter aware, when you guys passed the transient room tax, the tourism tax, paying that tax became burdensome. We talked about all the forms that you have to fill out, one of the previous presenters. So we tried to do a fix legislatively, and then unfortunately we're sued by the League of Cities and the Kentucky tourism industry, so that stopped it in its tracks.
Anyone else seeking to be recognized? All right. Appreciate it very much. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
All right. Anyone on the committee have anyone that showed up late maybe they'd like to recognize? All right. I believe the next meeting will be August the 26th here in the annex, not at the State Fair. I know there's some State Fair meetings in August. It'll be August 26th at 9 a.m. in room 149 of the annex. No business. There's no other business before us. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.